Hiya. Welcome to this sort of pre-recorded conversation. My name's Joe, and I'm from the Frontline Network. The Frontline Network works across the 4 nations of the UK, so England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland. And the main thing that we do is sort of try and support sort of frontline workers in the role that they're doing. So try and help them get access to support, training, provide them a space to sort of network and have conversations around the role that they're doing. Like everybody, over the past couple of months, we've had to really change and adapt what we do and, really change to the challenges of COVID. And one of the things that we found when speaking with staff and organisations is remote support and how staff, service users and everyone involved has had to sort of adapt to that, and things that have been a challenge and things that have been good in that. So we thought it would be good to have sort of a conversation and put that out to everyone to see afterwards around sort of how different organisations have adapted to this and what they found works well, what found hasn't worked well, and how this may work moving forward as we sort of come out of lockdown into the next phase and whatever comes after that. So with me today, I've got Mike Wright, and he is the Senior Service Manager for Outreach at Cyrenians. Cyrenians are a charity that tackles the causes and consequences of homelessness in the East Central Belt of Scotland. They have over 40 projects, including conflict resolution, family support, food recycling, residential communities, and a number of services for people who are rough sleeping or in temporary accommodation. And Mike's remit is to support the outreach team's work in 4 different areas. So Housing First, assertive outreach, health and homelessness, and policy and participation. So thanks for agreeing to do this today, Mike.
Thank you.
And we've also got Sharon Clint. So Sharon is the Learning and Development Manager at Groundswell. Groundswell work with people with experience of homelessness, offering opportunities to contribute to society and create solutions to homelessness. Participation is at the core of what they do because experience of homelessness is crucial in making decisions that affect lives and ultimately help people move out of homelessness. All of Groundswell's work delivers at least one of their 3 strategic goals, which are progression, good health, and creating change. So thank you as well, Sharon, for agreeing to do this and joining us.
No problem. Thank you, Joe.
Brilliant. So I think, first of all, I'd just like to ask you both, and Mike, I'll start with you, and then Sharon come into you afterwards, sort of how your organisation has had sort of change and adapt since lockdown started and sort of everybody in sort of mid-March. How have you found that?
It's been a challenging time and quite an interesting time. I suppose that when we looked at our services when the outbreak first happened, we were trying to look at ways that we could make sure, I suppose, that people who worked within the services and people who used the services could remain safe. There was a real desire in Edinburgh to make sure that everybody was able to find a place that they could safely self-isolate. Obviously, that's not the case so much for people who are rough sleeping or who are in the type of temporary accommodation where there are a large number of people sharing communal facilities. In Edinburgh, we use quite a lot of bed and breakfasts and shared houses, that kind of thing, where we can have maybe in excess of 100 people per building. And so I suppose that was identified as something that would be potentially high risk for kind of for infection in the future. So we borrowed from the way of working of our street outreach team. Our street outreach team go out to where people are, places like car parks, graveyards, etc., anywhere that people might be spending time. I guess one of the advantages of that way of working is that it's outside. We know that has offered a greater deal of protection from COVID. I suppose the interactions, because they take place outside, there's that aspect. They also tend to be at a slight distance, but we really wanted to keep going that way because we felt it was important to reach as many people as possible. Not everybody has the same access to information through the form of television news, print news, social media, that kind of thing. And we were also aware that many of the services that people rely on would be looking at potentially having to change. It might be, for example, that some of the building-based services might be changing their hours of operation. In some cases, they were closing altogether. And so suddenly, I suppose, our sort of approach was twofold. One, in the very highest priority, was to try and find people and offer them an opportunity to move into a hotel space, for example, where it might be easier for them to self-isolate. And the other part being around about connection, because if suddenly all the places where you might choose to spend time, or the services that you may have relied upon, have altered their ways of operation, their hours of operation, then suddenly you could become quite potentially disconnected. And I think we very much recognise the importance of good connections in someone's life when trying to move away from homelessness. But just even on a practical level, if it was to relay information, say new findings around about COVID, then how were we going to stay in touch with people to let them know sort of the latest information and what their options were? Yeah,
that sounds really good. And I think what you say about connection there is really, really pertinent, because even when we aren't in lockdown, like you said, if you have that connection with someone, it definitely makes things a little bit easier. And Sharon, if I can just come to you and ask sort of how yourself and how Groundswell have had to sort of change and adapt since this all started.
Yeah, sure. So Groundswell, the work we do is made up mostly of two big tranches of work. So, and it's all related to health. So the first part being our homeless healthcare advocacy service, which you touched upon, and also our insight and action. So lots and lots of research stuff. About 3 weeks into lockdown, we'd suspended most face-to-face homeless healthcare advocacy appointments. So homeless healthcare advocacy is when somebody who's got lived experience is trained to advocate on behalf of those currently experiencing homelessness. And they will go out and they'll physically support people to get to their health appointments and get what they want dealt with. And obviously instilling some areas of self-advocacy for that person as well, and helping them build up their own capacity to advocate for themselves in the future. So a lot of that we had to suspend, and that was always going to be the case. Many of the services had closed and changed how they were working, so we simply weren't able to continue the way we were doing. Obviously, a lot of our staff and volunteers coming, some with lived experience themselves, have similar health issues to the people that we're supporting. So we have, this might include diabetes, respiratory conditions, compromised immune systems, and therefore we recognise this as being quite high risk work in a pandemic. So obviously we were like, okay, things need to calm down here. The only way we could do this was by adapting what we do. So we developed a call and check homeless health service. So we used our peer advocacy model to ensure that clients continue to have physical and mental health issues addressed. And that's been active now in London since just the end of March. Within the first 11 weeks, 17 volunteers and staff members were trained up and had made 460 calls with 74 clients experiencing homelessness during the pandemic. And this is now something that we're able to roll out. We're rolling this out now to our Health Now partners in Crisis at Newcastle, and in Birmingham, Shelter in Greater Manchester, and Dublin also, where they also were doing HHPA, but they also obviously had to put that on hold. So we're looking as well now to see how much of our training can be put online. This is a great opportunity for us. We like to see an opportunity and a silver lining where we can. So yeah, we've had to make some major adaptations to what we do. Just trying to think. Oh yes, so of course we also, through our Insight and Action team, started collating lots and lots of information from clients that we've been working with and from clients that were moving into hotels, for example. We used the call and check service as a route as well to get more information from people. Were they willing, then having had a conversation with an advocate, were they then willing to also be a part of our research? And we started creating a lot of different information guideline sheets. So some of those were around drug and alcohol, managing drug and alcohol dependency, and explaining the pandemic to people. So we created those guides, and we also managed to put them in a couple of different languages. So we now have them in English, Polish and Romanian. So yeah, we've been pushing to make the best of what effectively is a bad deal.
Yeah, so it sounds like there's been a lot of work going on, and similar to sort of Mike, both of you have had to sort of adapt and put some things on pause and maybe put some other things in place. And I think just sort of moving on to kind of like support, and sort of a lot of support has had to move remotely, like you've both said, some sort of face-to-face stuff has had to maybe pause or been looked at differently. So for example, Sharon, you said about call and check. Sort of how have the staff within like your teams found the move to remote support? Because traditionally when we're supporting people who are in hostels or you're doing outreach work or whatever, it's very much face to face, or if you need to go somewhere, I can, either myself or someone can physically come with you to make sure that you go there and that you're comfortable there. Like Mike, can I just maybe come to you and maybe just talk about how your staff have maybe found the move?
I would say that one of the most difficult calls or bits of communication I've had during the process was talking to the Housing First team and telling them that they would be required to work in a slightly different way. They were really keen to keep going as business as usual, if you like, because I think they saw the importance of that service to the people that it was going to work with. So I think that the team have definitely seen that less connection through other forms of communication. And what they've tried to do is be quite creative about how they might be able to still provide some of the same support. So I can give you a couple of examples. We have looked at things where, for example, we could do a socially distanced walk. Through our Housing First service, for example, rather than going into somebody's house and spending time with them there, where people, for example, maybe have dogs, could we go out for a dog walk and, while observing distancing, still have some of that rich face-to-face contact, and to keep that relationship that I believe is at the centre of Housing First and actually of homelessness services going, so that the person doesn't feel necessarily abandoned during the pandemic. I think that any time as a system we respond in to a crisis in certain ways, it can quite often be quite deficit based, and so therefore we run the risk of undermining some of the work that we've done, or we run the risk of falling into some of the old habits that perhaps service provision have offered in the past. Another thing that we have done, for example, is when people have had to leave the house for things like visits to the chemist to pick up prescriptions, then I suppose there's an opportunity there to get alongside people, so we can maybe walk them going to the chemist on their sort of permitted time out with the house, and use that as a time to sort of check in with people to make sure that they've got a good understanding of what to do if things change in relation to their own health or those of people who they care about. We've also, I think we've kind of organically taken on a number of or bits of new work, or perhaps just slightly changed our focus. So in the Housing First service, for example, we have realised that for people who have to self-isolate or who are shielding for, I guess, perhaps for underlying health conditions, that suddenly leaving the house becomes a much more difficult thing to do. So we've worked in partnership with health and other voluntary sector organisations in Edinburgh, for example, to arrange delivery of prescriptions for people who are advised not to leave the house, to make sure that everyone has access to food. We've been operating a delivery food parcel service. In our hospital inreach team, the pressure that's being created on the health service has sort of necessitated a piece of step-down accommodation for people coming out of hospital. And those would be people who, although they don't require to stay in hospital, they still require some sort of health input on an ongoing basis in order to recover. So we have taken over a respite centre in Edinburgh, and it's been used as this kind of step-down accommodation. The hospital inreach team would normally be concerned with providing helping people have a good discharge upon leaving hospital, making sure that they're not discharged onto the streets or into homelessness. And they've adapted their way of working into staffing, I suppose, also helping people to move from hospital into this step down, and then while they're in the step down, looking at what the options are, either to return to any accommodation they may have had or to make applications for new accommodation.
Yeah, that sounds really good. And
roundabout.
Yeah.
Is that enough? Sorry.
Sorry. No, that just sounds really good and quite challenging as well on all aspects, I think, there, and have sort of staff maybe expressed that things have been a challenge at times?
People have definitely found it harder not having contact with each other. I think that has been something that perhaps we've all taken for granted, the types of conversations that you have when you're making a cup of tea, when you're doing your case notes perhaps at the end of the day, when you're at the printer. And I suppose that sense of collective, that mutual support has been difficult to replicate. We do an awful lot of things like reflective practice through Zoom and video calls, regular phone calls, but it doesn't feel to be quite the same for people. And for a lot of people within the team, it's a relatively new experience doing this amount of kind of online conversation. And it can feel quite awkward, I think, for people at the start.
Yeah, definitely. I think there is something about someone who's had to spend a lot of time on Zoom calls as well. It does take a bit of getting used to, and there is a distance, even though you can see someone's face, there is still that distance. Sharon, if I can just come to you and ask how sort of the staff and your peer advocates at Groundswell have found the shift.
Yeah, sure. So, I think similar to Mike, really, and I think it's fair to say, it's quite a mixed bag. You'll find that some staff are really thriving. They're loving the working from home. I've got to say I'm one of them. I can do my job from home. It's not something that I desperately need to be in the office for. That's not to say I don't miss my colleagues, I do. But it does tend, now that I see more people than I did historically, and in a much more structured way. So people attend meetings a lot more now, which is great, because they seem to have it's more accessible time-wise. They haven't got to travel to get to us, for example. But I know that there are struggles. I know that some staff are struggling. Mostly that's around struggling to manage their job when there's no face-to-face, as Mike was saying. But so our wellbeing and progression support provides it remains a central part of the activities. There's a lot of uncertainty at the moment, and as much as our team's incredibly close and thrive off being busy and human interaction, making a difference to people's lives, this sudden change in daily routine has really kind of thrown the progression team a little bit, because a lot of that work would be face-to-face. It would be sitting and supporting somebody to make phone calls, helping them to put together applications and stuff like that. And I think that's slightly harder to do when you're not sitting in a room with somebody. So I think there's what's the word I'm looking for? I think it's complications. Complications arise from not being able to sit down with somebody and have those face-to-face discussions. But as I say, it is a mixed bag. At the moment, we are, as an organisation, we've mostly been so busy, aiming for a business as usual attitude. And we've got a fantastic support network. We have multiple meetings throughout the week. I think I have more team meetings with my team now than I would have. I'm a part of the national team, so my team wouldn't sit in the office anyway. They're all scattered across the country. So I definitely see more of my team now than I expect I would have had I been in the office. But I know for some people that's not the case. And yeah, I think as I say, multiple meetings, coffee drop-in sessions every day by Zoom. So if you want that kind of see you in the kitchen, general chit chat, we're not allowed to talk about work. And I won't tell you some of the random conversations we have had, but they are pretty random. We also get a wellbeing advice sheet coming from our mental health. I want to say mental health worker, that's not his job title. And for the life of me right now, it doesn't compute, but he puts an advice sheet together on a weekly basis and disseminates that through the whole team. So some of our volunteers are doing the call and check, so they've found that really useful, helping to keep their hand in, keeping them busy. They're making maybe 7 or 8 calls a day to clients, and they feel that they're being useful and they're really enjoying that. There's a handful of volunteers that I've not heard where they're at with all of this, and I know that some of them are really struggling with being distant from us. I know that for them, coming into the office on a regular basis was an important part of their life, an important part of the process of getting up and doing something on a day. So I know that there are definitely dissatisfactions and disappointments within all of this. But I think as an organisation, we're finding our way around it, and we're doing everything that we can, and we're always looking for new options. So if you have any ideas.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's something that, the first couple of weeks and even couple of months, a lot of people were getting their head around what it means to work from home or changing routines and stuff. And as this has gone on, people have found ways of working, and organizations have found ways of substituting things. So like those coffee drop-ins and those well-being check-ins and stuff as well. And Sharon, if I can just come back to you as well, and just maybe ask how the people you support and people who are experiencing homelessness, how they found the shift as well, because obviously it's been a massive shift for them, both in terms of everything that's going on and how you process that information, but then also in terms of receiving support, engaging with organizations, how have they found that transition?
Okay, I mean, so through the call and check stuff, obviously we're hearing dissatisfaction and people being really disappointed by services. Historically, that's been the case anyway, though, in some cases. So, that was to be expected. However, we are hearing some really good feedback as well from service users especially regarding the call and check service. Although I do not doubt that they would much rather we were there face to face, getting them to their appointment and having a couple with them afterwards. But mostly people are recognising that we're not choosing this, and they're very respectful of the fact that this is how things have to work at the moment. And I think they just appreciate having somebody call and check in with them, and it's not about rent arrears, and it's not about have you sorted out your benefits, and it's not about have you tidied your room yet. So, I think they're really appreciating just that constant and continuous contact, really. I do have a couple of quotes I pre-prepared. So we know that changes in the NHS service delivery is meaning that people are struggling to meet their health needs, and they're concerned about knowing when appointments might start up again. So one gentleman is reported to have said, "I've been in lockdown for 3 weeks, can't access a GP service, and unable to speak with my key worker as they are unwell. Had a hospital appointment next week that has been cancelled, don't know when I'll get another appointment." Somebody else said, "I feel like I've been put to the back of the queue for health. Hospital appointments have been cancelled, GPs doing phone consultations, medication's difficult to get, it's double the work to talk to a GP and pharmacy, and I've had to wait because of medication shortages." So we are seeing a lot of dissatisfaction within this area. We as a health charity are not entirely thrilled by the way things are going for our client group. Obviously, we would like things to be a lot smoother. We would like things to work a lot faster. But obviously, everybody's under the same umbrella of stress. So yes, we are recognising that for the most part, one of the biggest problems we have is the digital divide. So this is not a now problem. This is a now problem and a future problem. Now that a lot of organisations, including my own, recognise that stuff can be done online and at less cost and with faster results, such as training or a doctor's appointment. This is going to be problematic for the client group. This is something we really need to look at and address. It's not a viable option for every single person that's experiencing homelessness. In terms of changes to mental health service provision, a gentleman said he's feeling suicidal, said he'd tried to end his life 3 times recently. Being supported by a mental health team, his appointments have been cancelled and they're now over the phone rather than face to face, and he finds this incredibly difficult. Some people, however, have engaged absolutely tons more. Some people are finding this not necessarily positive, but they're using this as a springboard to improve their health. So there's been positive impacts of the response. So we had somebody doesn't say gentleman rather. I'm aware of people that are real long-term rough sleepers who would always refuse to come in, refuse to work with services, and because of this, COVID-19, they have. And to me, that's the biggest thing. This can be a legacy, it really can. It can be a legacy for homelessness, for health in homelessness particularly. I hope that the homeless population have seen the hard work that everyone's putting in. I mean, we have scooped up, I think, across London, I think we're looking at 1,100 people into hotel rooms. So I'm hoping that will bring us closer together, because clients will say, do you know that? The local authorities, the GP practices, the specialist ones, all tried really hard to protect them and get them in. And hopefully that forms a relationship moving forward. So I think there are positives that can come out of this, and I think some of our service users recognise that, and I think some are struggling.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think this is a bit of a mixed bag, but there is real opportunity in this. There's maybe people who haven't had opportunities to engage with services before, or who've maybe been reluctant for various reasons, who are now having the opportunity to re-engage with services, who have been put into some sort of emergency or temporary accommodation, and that can be used as a springboard to the next step, whatever that may look like. And Mike, can I just come back to you, because I know you're speaking about like the socially distanced walks and the prescription check-ins. Are there anything else which maybe the people that you support have found sort of really useful, or maybe even challenging, similar to what Sharon was saying about how everything sort of played out and how they've had to adapt as well?
Yes, we've had a real mixed bag. We have heard from some people who have recognised that the quick provision and the easier access to things like prescriptions and accommodation have come at the right time for them. And even a few weeks later have been able to reflect with us upon how they've been able to make changes that they might not have done at other points. However, a bigger percentage of people are experiencing some of the things that I heard Sharon describing, particularly around about digital exclusion. For example, people that we support who are part of the recovery community, who've maybe been used to having a community of meetings that take place where there is a lot of mutual and peer support. They found that for those who have access to video conferencing facilities, it doesn't feel quite the same thing. And then, of course, out with that, there have been quite a high number of people who just don't have access to smartphones, computers, or if they do, aren't able to perhaps afford broadband to have in the house, all these kind of things that I suppose a lot of people take for granted. So it has been a real mix. I think something that we noticed that when the first sort of easing of lockdown came about, that rather sadly, the rate of non-fatal overdoses in Edinburgh tripled and has pretty much stayed at that rate since things have been kind of relaxed slightly. And I suppose, although I think we could overall say that people expressed that they felt cared for during the initial response, where we were really seeking to make sure everyone had connection and a place to self-isolate. The longer that's gone on, I think the people have been struggling more with the sort of the day-to-day connection that they have, and I suppose things to do with their time. You know, I guess it sounds great to be given a hotel room if you've been living on the streets, but ultimately it's still only a room, and so it is quite constraining on if you have to be there for quite a long period of time.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point you make, because obviously you've got the physical health aspect of getting people in off the street and ensuring that they're safe, but then what's the support around that? And I think that's really important as we continue to sort of move forward out of this into, the next stages where, hotels, B&Bs, this temporary accommodation begins to shut down, and we're seeing a lot of emphasis put on house and first models, and I think which is really important. But we need to, as a sector, we need to make sure that support's in place, and also speak to wider government and wherever that comes from. And I think as well, it highlights something that everyone does anyway, but it highlights, the importance of taking sort of an individual and personalized approach when we're working with and supporting people. So finally, I just sort of maybe want to touch on sort of what do you feel maybe happens next as we do move forward? And are there maybe aspects of the work that's happened over the last couple of months that you really want to keep and embedding your services moving forward? And likewise, like I think we've already touched on, are there any like real fears or concerns? You know, we've touched on the digital divide. Are there maybe any other areas of worry that we maybe need to be aware of and keep an eye out when we're supporting people, and as well with staff as well, because as we transition out, staff may find that change again a bit of a struggle. So Mike, can I just come to you first on that? And I know there's a lot in there.
Yeah. I think that the staff, it's interesting reflecting, the staff team have probably found at the beginning of the work that we've done, they've talked about it being a great time to be in homelessness because there's been more resource and more opportunities, and that has been replaced, if you like, over time by a deep concern about what comes next for people who have been accommodated temporarily during this period. I guess there are probably a number of things that we're looking at. We operate the Housing First consortium for Edinburgh. I think Housing First has been looked at, as you mentioned, as potentially a route out of some of the hotels for some people. Another thing that's created a bit of an opportunity has been the temporary increase in the local housing allowance and the impact on housing benefit. In Edinburgh, we generally can't access the private rented market at all. The local housing allowance doesn't allow you normally to rent. I think there's usually somewhere in the region of 5 properties a week you might be able to afford on local housing allowance. The increase has affected that dramatically, and we were able to submit a short notice application to the Scottish Government to create a small pilot project for helping people move directly from the hotels into private rented sector. So I think that's quite a big thing for us, because in Edinburgh we have a really small percentage of social housing as our overall stock, and a lot of pressures on it around I guess a lot of tourism and a lot of buy-to-let properties, Airbnb, that kind of thing. So anything which helps us increase the stock is definitely hugely beneficial. So that will be one route out for some people. I think one of the big concerns for us is around about people who are deemed to be no recourse to public funds. In Edinburgh, as I'm sure, like most cities in the UK, the local authority has sought to accommodate everyone regardless of their entitlement and their status. However, I'm not sure where the money for that will come going forward. In Scotland, we have a 20 organisation collective called Everyone Home, who are kind of lobbying at the moment for some of the changes that we think we might need to kind of ensure 3 key priorities, if you like. Those would be homes for good health, no return to rough sleeping, and no evictions to homelessness. So I guess the issue of people with no recourse is kind of central to those 3, and I would hope that we can potentially make some progress on the basis that that the work that's gone around protecting people for the pandemic would be what I would describe as a public health approach. So, seeking to treat your population being everyone who's here, and seeking to treat them all equally to allow everyone to experience better health, rather than some sort of arbitrary guidelines along who might be entitled to, might not. But I very much realise that's a battle that a lot of people, I'm sure, will be facing across the country.
Yeah, definitely. And I think the issue of no recourse is, it was a massive issue before COVID, and I think COVID has really highlighted the concern around that. And like you said, what happens next with people who have no recourse. Sharon, can I just come to you to sort of touch on that? Where do you see sort of things happening for Groundswell moving forward, and any sort of maybe areas of concern or any areas of practice you'd want to keep?
Yeah, so I won't go down the same list as Mike just did. I think our concerns are pretty equally matched. Where do you start with all of that anyway? But some of the stuff that we've put together, some of the stuff that's grown out of this horrendous situation, I think it's fair to say we're seeing a lot more collaborative work across the sector. That is definitely something we need to see more of and needs to stay. We're growing our networks, we're having greater impact, we've got a bigger voice if we work together. I think it's definitely worth holding on to that. The call and check service, specific to Groundswell, obviously, call and check, we are definitely going to keep hold of that to the point where we can't believe that we weren't doing it before. It just seems elemental now. So yes, that's definitely something we will want to keep hold of. That's something we can build into our homeless healthcare advocacy. We can remodel it slightly. It can be a reminder for taking medications, an appointment reminder system. You know, it has vast opportunities. I think we're starting to prove that we have a really good insight on what's happening within people, within the final words. I think we are proving as Groundswell that we have an ear to the voice of people experiencing homelessness. They're talking to us. Our Insight and Action team and the research team are bringing in some really fascinating stuff. We're really keen to find out some of the impacts that's coming off the back of COVID-19. And we're getting a lot of different reports out there. And we're hoping to make some real changes with that. And push for some real positive change in the way that people experiencing homelessness are dealt with going forward. We're proving ourselves credible, which is lovely. I think we're hoping to, and if we're not already becoming the voice of people experiencing homelessness, that's definitely on our cards for the future, if that's okay for me to say. But yeah, I think the biggest thing is I think we've proven that we don't need an office space necessarily. I suppose there was a bit of a thought that the office, a bit like a youth club, you know, the office is where you need to be. It was the place to be hip and cool in Groundswell. And actually Groundswell is intrinsic to us. We are the organisation. So even though there is some dissatisfactions and some people are maybe having some difficulties with doing the work when it's not face to face, I think the ethos still stands. We're still very much a strong team. We're still very much able to push forward and say, do you know what, actually, if this is the way it needs to work, this is the way it will work, and we'll make it work, and we'll still do the work, and we'll still be a team doing it. So I think we've discovered that actually that's great for us, because that means we can expand even more nationally than we already nationally are, which would be wonderful.
Yeah, that's brilliant. And I think there is as much of a challenge as the past 3 and a bit months has been. There are definitely things to take out of this moving forward, and also things which might be done differently, and to take that time to sort of reflect if things ever sort of slow down. Yeah, that's it. I haven't got any more questions, so I'll just like to thank both of you for sort of agreeing this and talking to me today. What I'll do is when this video goes up, I'll post links to your website and your Twitter. So if people want to find out more about Groundswell or Cyrenians, find them on Twitter, have a look on the website, have a look at the work they're doing, get in touch, have conversations. It's what it's about. It's what we need to do more of, as Sharon, as you very clearly highlighted. If anybody wants to know more about Frontline Network, you can go onto our website, you can go onto our Twitter. We also have a forum where if you've got a question or if you're not sure on something, you can post it up on there, and our network can answer that as well and feed that back into it. And just, I hope everybody manages to stay safe with this and carry on having conversations, both looking after yourself, your family, and the people that we work with as well. So thank you.